Justice Amy Coney Barrett wanted to show Jasmine Crockett what would happen if she did something wrong. She imagined she could scare Jasmine by using her strength to smash resistance. But when the cameras kept rolling and the truth spread like wildfire, it wasn't Jasmine who had to answer for what she did. The judge herself was there. Jasmine Crockett has been under a lot of stress before. She was used to being in confrontational situations, like tough committee hearings and national interviews. But this time it felt different. The envelope arrived on her desk in D.C. on a Monday morning, a big, official-looking paper with a gold seal on the front. At first, Jasmine thought it was simply another formality, like a request to talk about ethics or policy. But as she turned the pages, her face got more serious. It was a court order, and not just any old subpoena. She was being called to testify in a federal prosecution about possible wrongdoing in the residence. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was in charge of the hearing, which was the most interesting thing. Jasmine blinked in shock. Since when did a sitting Supreme Court justice preside over a federal probe involving a member of Congress? This was not normal, not even close. It seemed like a setup. Jasmine didn't spend any time. She phoned her lawyer, who used to be a prosecutor and was good at seeing hidden motives. He said, "They're reaching, Jasmine. It's not against the law to subpoena you, but the optics, they want to make an example out of me," Jasmine stated as she walked around her office. And they chose the wrong person. When Jasmine got to the courthouse, photographers were already waiting outside with cameras pointed at her every step. Jasmine entered through the door with her head held high. She was wearing a navy pantsuit, and her distinctive curls framed her determined face. The courthouse was colder than expected, clean and quiet inside. She sat down with her lawyers on either side of her, waiting for what was to happen. And then the doors opened. Justice Amy Coney Barrett came in wearing a robe and no expression. Their eyes locked for a moment. No words were said. But Jasmine saw it, a flash of recognition, maybe even a challenge in Barrett's look. Barrett took her seat, and the room stood still. Barrett started with a strong voice. "We are here today to gather testimony relevant to case number 24 FR 2025. Any disruption, defiance, or breaking of the rules will not be tolerated." Jasmine didn't move. "I'm not here to be a punching bag for anyone," she replied, leaning forward. "Name the charge if there is one. Otherwise, let's stop pretending this is justice." The room went quiet. At first, the prosecution's questions seemed normal, but then they weren't. They talked about Jasmine's past public comments, her views on controversial measures, and even her tweets. "This has nothing to do with the case," Jasmine finally remarked, her voice showing how angry she was. "I was called to testify about oversight, not my politics." The tension in the room grew. Barrett's gavel hit hard. Barrett snapped, "The witness won't speak out of turn." Jasmine leaned in slightly. "With all due respect, I will not be used as a political punching bag in this courtroom." The battle had begun. The chatter outside got louder. Barrett's challenge to Jasmine went viral. It wasn't simply her battle anymore. It had just begun. By the second day, the weight of the moment had sunk in. Jasmine got at the courts before dawn, which kept her out of the media circus. But today, it wasn't about how people reacted. It was about what was behind those thick oak doors. The tone within the courtroom was sharper, tighter. Barrett sat up high behind the bench, her back straight, her face blank. Jasmine was quiet, but aware. "Today, they're going to bait you," her lawyer said quietly. "Don't let them." But Jasmine didn't give up. The prosecution moved rapidly and asked questions that had nothing to do with the case. "Do you still think that the justice system is always political?" one prosecutor asked, holding up a printout of a speech Jasmine had given the year before. Jasmine remarked calmly, "I said it then and I'll say it now. There are parts of it that are." And this courtroom is proving it. A low murmur went across the spectators. Barrett hit the gavel, plainly angry. "You will answer the questions directly." But Jasmine wasn't going to let them dictate the story. "I'm answering directly," she said. You just don't like the answer. But it didn't stop there. The prosecution produced an exhibit, a social media post Jasmine had liked 3 years earlier. It was taken completely out of context and criticized a decision Barrett had made before he became a Supreme Court justice. When the message was shown on the courtroom screen, the chamber froze as if it were secret information. "You're really posting something I liked online years before this hearing even happened?" Jasmine murmured, her voice full of disbelief. "The post shows that you are biased against the court." Barrett didn't wait. "This is your last warning, Congresswoman Crockett. If you keep causing trouble, disrupt or respond." "That's not the same thing," Jasmine said back, not bothered at all. Barrett's jaw tightened, and the room went quiet again. The day was a flurry of questions meant to provoke and answers meant to defend. But Jasmine didn't back down. She wasn't yelling or storming out. She just had a strong, forceful presence. Everyone in that room, though, knew it wasn't over. Barrett stood for something. Jasmine had also become one. And suddenly they were on a collision course. Jasmine rose up to leave when the session was over. Before she could take 2 steps, Barrett spoke again. "Congresswoman Crockett, a moment." Jasmine turned around. "You will return tomorrow, and I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach. This court does not put up with showmanship." Jasmine nodded slowly and said, "Neither do the people watching from home." Then she left without saying anything further. There were 3 times as many people outside, and they were ready with microphones. But Jasmine didn't stop. It wasn't about getting a soundbite, it was about getting through the storm without breaking. And the storm was just beginning. On the 3rd day, you could feel the tension in the courtroom. Jasmine was aware of it. So did her legal team. And most crucially, Judge Barrett did too. The courthouse was full of enthusiasm, and the day of judgment was almost here. The questions would keep coming, and the stakes would get higher, but Jasmine was ready. She wasn't here to have fun or to fold. The fight was only getting started. The prosecutor didn't do anything. He kept going. "Do you agree that your refusal to answer directly, your aggressive tone, and your willingness to undermine this bench's authority show a clear lack of respect for due process?" Jasmine leaned a little bit forward, her eyes never leaving the spot. She said quietly, "What I won't do is sit here and pretend that what's going on is fair. It's not about justice, it's about how things look." Barrett's voice rang out. "That's enough," but Jasmine wouldn't give up. "It's not enough," she said, her words heavy with meaning. "Because while we're sitting here in this courtroom, being told what we can and can't say, there are real people out there who are watching and learning exactly what this system does to voices it can't control." Barrett's voice changed to one of frigid determination. "Congresswoman Crockett, this is the last time you can interrupt. If you speak again out of turn, I will utilize my power and hold you in contempt. I think you should be more careful with what you say." That was the time. The one that made everything different. Jasmine's lawyer discreetly patted her arm to attempt to calm her down. But Jasmine shrugged him off, her voice calm and firm. She remarked, "I was taught to speak up when something isn't right, not when it's easy. Not when it's okay. When it matters." The courtroom was rather quiet. Judge Barrett looked at her and thought about what to do. She didn't think twice about what to do next. "This court finds the witness in contempt," she stated. "Take her away." People in the gallery gasped in shock. "Are you serious?" Jasmine inquired, getting up slowly, her voice full of calm indignation. "You've repeatedly disrespected the authority of this court," Barrett remarked. Jasmine said, "No, I've been disrespectful of the abuse of it, and I'll do it again if it means telling the truth." The bailiffs came up, but they weren't sure what to do. But Jasmine didn't resist. She just looked at Barrett and said, "You'll regret this, not as a threat, but as a promise. Something has started outside of those courtroom walls." Videos of the fight went viral on social media. Politicians shouted out, attorneys questioned the legality of what had just transpired, and individuals who had never heard of Jasmine's name were now sharing her face with phrases like bravery, targeted, and all of it was being observed every second. She didn't hang her head as Jasmine was let out. Even as flashbulbs went off and reporters yelled her name, she stood up straight and looked straight ahead. She understood this wasn't her failure. It was the beginning of something more significant, a backlash that no robe could muffle. The air outside the courthouse was different now. Charged, not predictable. Reporters started yelling questions at Jasmine Crockett before she even got to the transfer vehicle. "Did you think you would be arrested today, Congresswoman? Do you think Justice Barrett treated you fairly? Is this political retaliation?" Jasmine didn't answer yet. She kept walking. Inside the building, her legal team was already scurrying. They didn't think Barrett would go so far as to order her removal, which would have silenced a sitting member of Congress. For such a flimsy reason, this wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. When Jasmine was officially charged with contempt of court, social media was going crazy. There were already 1,000 alternative captions for the video of her stating, "You'll regret this." But not everyone reacted the same way. Some were angry, while others said she was just showing off. But the more thoughtful people were asking a different question. Why is this happening at all? Things weren't going well for Barrett inside the courthouse. Within hours, 2 former federal judges made public statements saying that it was not right for a Supreme Court justice to preside over a politically charged session with such obvious disciplinary action. "Is Justice Barrett crossing a constitutional line?" was one headline. While Jasmine was waiting for her legal review that night, her team filed an emergency motion. The motion was clear. This isn't about how to act in court. This is about stopping people from speaking up, about using the highest court to scare an elected official who didn't want to play small. At the same time, something else was going on. Calls started flooding into legislative offices. Regular people showed their support, and even a few members from the other party reached out privately to provide discreet support. Then the video appeared. An anonymous court reporter leaked a long, uncensored recording of the session. It revealed Jasmine's remarks, her tone, and most importantly, the moment Barrett told her to be held in contempt. Without any editing or media manipulation, it showed an image that was much less disruptive than what the official story said. The video received millions of views before morning. At daybreak, Jasmine was freed on her own recognizance, pending review of the contempt judgment. Her lawyer was waiting for her at the exit. At first, he didn't say anything, but he nodded as they walked to the car. Finally, he spoke. They overplayed it. Jasmine smiled, even though she was tired. "Let's make sure that matters." That afternoon, Jasmine's counsel asked the court to drop the accusation of contempt. The motion didn't merely argue for technical faults. It questioned the legitimacy of the procedure itself, demanding that Barrett disqualify herself going forward, citing bias, overreach, and conflict of interest. This wasn't a judicial chess match anymore. It was a political earthquake. Barrett was quiet while the motion went through the system. There will be no comments, press conferences, or declarations, but people close to the court started to talk. Some of the clerks were worried about how quickly things had gotten out of hand. Others quietly doubted her judgment. Barrett's silence wasn't a sign of strength. It was a sign of strategy. But Jasmine and her colleagues saw it as proof that this wasn't about protocol. It was about taking charge and putting her in her place. But that plan didn't work out. What started as an attempt to humiliate and punish had given Jasmine something much more powerful: national attention, moral authority, and a rising number of people who supported her. By the end of the week, people were protesting outside the courthouse. Not huge, yet loud enough to get people's attention. Let her speak. Power shouldn't silence truth. And this is what resistance looks like, were some of the signs. The contempt order may have been aimed to halt the discourse, but instead, it opened a door that could never be shut. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak publicly for 48 hours following her release. Not a tweet, not a statement, nothing. She wasn't unsure when she was quiet. She was thinking. While she was in the courtroom, her lawyers labored around the clock to prepare not only a defense, but also a case against the fundamental basis of what had happened there. In the meantime, things were happening outside the country. The story made it to cable news in prime time. Some anchors acted like it was a political scandal, while others acted like it was a cultural event. But this time, the film is what made it different and what made it stick. That video of the courtroom that wasn't manipulated. No yelling or outbursts. A black congresswoman calmly saying she had the right to speak, and a Supreme Court justice telling her to be quiet or go to jail. People didn't like that picture. It couldn't be turned. The response wasn't merely political, it was personal. One after the other, civil rights lawyers used social media to say that Barrett's actions were against the law. Law school professors from all over the country wrote short articles overnight. Many others said the same thing. Contempt of court is not a way to suppress expression. It is a way to keep things in order. And Crockett hadn't caused any problems. She had told the truth to those in charge. And power didn't like it. People who usually stayed out of these kinds of fights had to reply. Over 30 lawmakers wrote a letter together to criticize the Versterza contempt charge, saying that an alarming erosion of respect for elected voices, especially those that challenge tradition and privilege. Jasmine's legal team wasn't only clearing her name, they were also planning something bigger behind the scenes. They filed a petition with the Judicial Conference to evaluate Barrett's conduct confidentially and began preparing expert testimony to present before a review panel, should it come to that. Jasmine watched and listened as everything built up. Then the time came. At 11:07 a.m., Jasmine showed up outside the courts on Monday morning. Her lawyers were there for her. Cameras snapped swiftly, reporters jostled for position. She wore all white on purpose, and she looked clean and calm. She came up to the podium, took a deep breath, and started, "I want to thank everyone who has contacted me in the last few days. Not because this has been easy, but because it's been essential. It wasn't just about me, what transpired in that courtroom. It was about how we deal with power and what we do when someone won't back down." She stopped and stared at the cameras. "I was found guilty of contempt of court, not because I broke the law, but because I wouldn't change who I am to fit into a system that punishes people who look like me for being brave. I came to give my testimony. I was ready to speak the truth, but I was silenced." She stopped for a longer time. Judge Barrett may be in charge, but she doesn't have the last word. The crowd went wild. Jasmine didn't answer any of the reporters' inquiries. She took a step back, nodded to her lawyer, and left. It gained more than 15 million views in just 24 hours. The Department of Justice sent out a short statement that same night. "We know about the recent legal actions involving Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. We will be evaluating the conduct and judicial handling of the matter." That wasn't normal, and it wasn't pointless. It meant that this wasn't just a public argument. It was going through official channels. Barrett didn't say anything in court, but in legal circles, rumors started to spread about growing pressure. There were a lot of rumors going around about what Supreme Court aides were saying to each other and how uncomfortable people were with the justice still being involved in the case. By the middle of the week, Jasmine's lawyers had made their last request, an emergency appeal to have the contempt charge dropped and a formal application for Judge Barrett to be removed from the hearing because of bias and personal interest. The last line of the file was this court was not used to uphold justice, but to punish speech that should not be allowed to stand. And now it was up to the system that said it would preserve freedom to show that it still could. The courtroom was vacant the morning the ruling was made. Neither Jasmine nor Judge Barrett were there. Instead, a group of top federal judges privately looked into the emergency filings. There were no cameras or media hype, just a private meeting to go over what had happened and the rules that had been broken to make it happen. The decision came down just before noon. It was quick, clear, and very bad. The contempt order against Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was completely dropped. The court determined that her removal from the hearing had no legal grounding, and that her words, while aggressive, did not satisfy the bar for disruption warranting contempt. The panel also said that the decision to silence her went against the idea of fair judgment, and that they were very worried by Judge Barrett's behavior. The institution that had tried to suppress Jasmine had to admit that it had gone too far for the first time. The news spread around the country like wildfire. At 1 p.m., Jasmine's name was trending on all platforms. More and more politicians from both parties started to call for a review of the bigger case that Barrett had been in charge of. Quiet discussions turned public as members of the Senate Judiciary Committee demanded explanations on how a Supreme Court justice came to monitor a highly contentious session with no apparent jurisdictional basis. There were problems behind the scenes. Barrett's old friends in the legal community, who had complimented her calmness and self-control for years, stopped talking. Some delivered carefully worded statements distancing themselves. Some people just wouldn't say anything. A former federal judge, who asked to remain nameless, expressed it clearly. Barrett made it personal. And when a judge makes it personal, they lose the robe, even if it's not in law. That afternoon, Jasmine didn't rejoice. This time, she gave a short press conference, not in front of the courtroom, but at a modest community center in the neighborhood where she used to work as a public defender. She appeared before a little crowd, no prepared remarks, no teleprompters. She said, "This isn't about me. This is about what it means when truth becomes a threat. When people think that speaking up is like breaking the rules." She looked down for a minute, selecting her next words carefully. "When I was in law school, I learned that contempt of court was meant to keep order, not give people power. Not pride, and not at all the comfort of the individuals at the top. But this week taught us something new, something that is harmful. That fear can even change the rules at the highest levels. Fear of making changes, fear of pushback, fear of voices like mine." Everyone in the room was quiet and listening. "But fear doesn't win," she remarked. "It reacts. It punishes. And it always, always goes too far." Barrett stayed out of sight. Legal experts thought she might have been told to wait and let the storm pass. But this wasn't a normal media storm. It had grown into something more. There were arguments among the legal community. Should a Supreme Court justice be able to take part in hearings that are politically charged? Should there be new rules on what is right and wrong? Could Congress ask for oversight? Jasmine didn't have all the power anymore. It was for everyone who had ever been told they were too much, like too loud or too unprofessional for sticking up for what they believed in. The narrative had spread to law students, organizers, activists, and even people who had never been to a courtroom before. A week later, a congressional subcommittee began a formal investigation into Barrett's behavior during the hearing. The message was clear. This wasn't done yet. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was never about winning a court case. It was about not letting someone shut you up when you needed to speak up. The law doesn't always safeguard the truth, but someone has to sacrifice everything to make it difficult to ignore. The day Jasmine Crockett went back to the courthouse steps, it was raining. Not as a witness or a target, but as a woman who had said no to being less than she was. The sky was gray, and steady drops fell as if the city itself was stopping to listen. Reporters stood close together under umbrellas. People who supported the cause stood on the sidewalk with signs they made themselves that had nothing to do with party lines. They weren't about politics anymore. They were about what Jasmine had come to represent. She stood under the awning of the courthouse, with water running down the marble behind her. And for the first time since the event, she didn't have lawyers or aides whispering in her ear. She was by herself. On purpose. "I've been thinking about silence for the past few weeks," she said, her voice steady and calm, with the rain lightly tapping on her microphone. "About how it's used as a tool, how it's asked for, expected, and enforced, especially when someone like me doesn't sit quietly and nod." She took a breath. "This didn't start because I broke a rule. It started because I didn't break." She didn't need to yell. She was determined. What happened in the courtroom wasn't merely a mistake in the law. It was a sign, a message not only to me, but to anyone who has the guts to voice their mind in a place that it isn't meant for them. But the truth is, this system doesn't get to choose when we talk. We do. Some members of the press tried to ask questions, but she softly raised her hand. Let me say this first, then I'll answer questions. She looked across to the doors to the courthouse. There is a price to pay for not shrinking. A real one. It can seem like public criticism, like detention, like headlines written to make you look bad before your side is even heard, Jasmine said. But that cost is nothing compared to the cost of not saying anything. I won't pay that. I won't ever do it. People in the audience clapped gently under their umbrellas. There was no loud, booming ovation. Instead, it was quiet and reverent, as if everyone realized they were viewing something important. What I experienced wasn't just about courtroom procedure. It was about who can talk without getting in trouble for it. The solution should never rely on color, gender, or politics. Jasmine stopped and looked around at the gathering. Her voice got softer. I've heard from people all over the country, teachers, students, nurses, factory workers, and people I'll never meet, who said that what happened to me reminded them of times when they were told to sit down, be quiet, and go along. And I see you and hear you all, and I pray you never give up either. She let the stillness last for a moment so she could feel the weight of her remarks before stepping back from the microphone. That would have been plenty. But then she added almost off script, meant for the people behind the cameras, almost like a whisper. They tried to make me regret telling the truth, but the only thing I regret is that so many others still feel they can't. As Jasmine turned to walk down the courthouse steps, the last camera panned back. Not in a hurry, not hiding, just wandering. Her remarks rang out on the air. I won't be silenced, and you shouldn't be either. By that evening, clips of her address had been put together into montages, reaction videos, and news pieces all across the world. The moment had gone from a judicial fight to a clear cultural moment. Jasmine had gone to that courthouse to testify. She left as a warning to everyone who thought that shutting someone up would make their message go away. It didn't. It made it louder. If this story touched you, and you think that everyone who has authority should be held accountable, then make sure you subscribe. We're telling the stories they don't want heard, and we're just getting started.